He's a thinker, a speaker, a writer, and a storyteller. We all know him for his bestsellers The Rosabal Line, Chanakya's Chant, The Vault of Vishnu, The Sialkot Saga, and many more. If you haven't guessed it yet, we are referring to Ashwin Sanghi, one of India's highest selling English fiction authors. He will speak to senior author and journalist Kaveri Bamzai about the making of the modern epic and his recent book, The Vault of Vishnu.
I want to begin first. If you could just describe for me some of the books in your bookcase, because so much of your work, Ashwin, is really on reading, and people
Yeah,
forget that to be a good writer, you
yeah,
need to be a great reader as well. And
sure.
I think you've proved that because your the amount of research you do and the amount of going back to the past, really for you the past really is the future. In a way, the past is the prologue. So I was just wondering if you could just tell us
Sure.
briefly about
First
the
of all,
very interesting
Kavri,
books
it,
there.
it's always an absolute pleasure to be in conversation with you because we've done these conversations before, and
Yeah.
it's almost like a free flow where one doesn't feel that there is any structure to it, and we simply seem to go wherever the mood takes us. So thank you for being
Thank
here
you.
because it makes all the difference.
Thank you.
Uh, as regards my reading habits, honestly, they've always been very, very eclectic. I
Yeah.
mean, what you see behind me right now, of course, I don't know whether I can actually let me try and move this around for you.
uh,
So it's just like multiple stuff over walls and
wow.
walls and walls. Three sides, I just have books,
Wow.
uh, and I mean, the stuff that you see behind me, of course, is mostly my reference material.
Right.
I have a ton of the entire Britannica behind me, and then, of course, I just behind me here is an entire volume of the works of Vivekanand. There is the entire Mahabharat series of Vivek Dev Roy, because I mean, Vivekta is literally my reference point for a lot of things because I don't read Sanskrit. So
Exactly.
it makes it so much easier for me.
Right.
And then just immediately behind me, in fact, you can see the entire Hadith by Bukhari,
Hmm.
as well as a couple of translations of the Quran.
Wow.
You I mean, frankly, there's just too much out here. There's too much going on.
But it's fascinating. It gives us an insight into your mind and into the way you read and think. It's so eclectic. It represents the kind of culture we grew up with, multicultural, all inclusive, embracing so many different cultures and religions
Absolutely,
and thoughts and ways of
absolutely.
life. So talk about that a bit. And during this COVID, how much of that came back to you, or how much were you disappointed by the way we reacted to the pandemic?
Well, frankly, I think given what we are seeing around us, Kavri, it seems to me that actually we've done a pretty decent job. Actually,
Hmm.
I mean, countries with far lower levels of population
Hmm.
have actually been struggling. So, in that sense, I genuinely believe that that there are bits and pieces of India which are sort of out of sync, but otherwise, to a very great extent, I think we have done a pretty remarkable job given the sort of limitations that we deal with in this country. But having said that, I think to a certain extent, what I'm feeling is that maybe the level of coordination that needs to be happening between the center and the states, that is something which, because ultimately boots on the ground is what is required in order. I mean, even if you take something like as simple as for example, getting a vaccine out there, I mean, it's going to be a long time before we'll actually, it's far easier for a country like a Singapore or a New Zealand, or for that matter, even a Dubai,
Hmm.
to be able to get the vaccine to reach all of its people. But the moment you talk about India and just the sheer scale of the exercise, anything is going to be a long trek. So, in that sense, I believe that we are in for the long haul. Those who say that, hey, listen, now the vaccine is out there and now everything will be fine. I see pretty much that I know there are all of these memes going around where people are talking about the fact that 2021 will be far better than 2020. I hope they are right, but I believe that 2021 will also be a struggle.
I agree with you, quite, because I think it'll only get worse before it gets better. But
Exactly.
but Ashwin, in Vault of Vishnu, you really did in a way predict this terrifying future with this army of superhuman Chinese soldiers. How did that happen?
Sometimes, honestly, Kavri, I think what happens is that if you write books which are based on research, then it's probable that somewhere along the way you are picking up information that may be out there. So, for example, I saw that happening when I wrote the Rosabal line, and I had predicted that, or rather, not predicted, but part of my story was an attack happening in Bombay with a bunch of Pakistani terrorists
Yes.
coming in on a boat and landing in on the shores of Bombay, and it felt very eerie because that's something which I would never in my wildest dreams have wanted to predict. So it was just another fictional story. The same applies even with the Vault of Vishnu, where frankly I was just thinking to myself that, hey, listen, we are living in a world of bioengineering and we are living in a world of artificial intelligence, and therefore doesn't it seem practical that superpowers would want to be engineering superhuman soldiers of some sort? And of course, for me, it sort of tied into the theme of the fact that you had a martial arts linkage between India and China, and it tied into the theme that possibly there could have been an ancient potion which is also being used in the modern bioengineering of these particular individuals or creatures, as it were. So I think for me, it just fit in beautifully into my story. I never set out to make a prediction. There wasn't an effort in that regard. And then suddenly on Twitter and Facebook, people started sending me messages saying that, oh, do you realize that now fiction seems to be playing out as fact? Because what you had shown on the Indo-China border of superhuman soldiers, now there are news reports that the Chinese are actually engineering these superhuman sort of creatures.
Right.
And for a minute, it was like, oh my God, and I've always maintained that fact is stranger than fiction. So I'm not surprised.
You've also maintained that myth plus history is mystery, which I found was a very interesting formula. Please do explain that.
Well, I mean, think about this, no, Kaveri. That I mean, in our in this is a country where we I mean, what is so fascinating and what is so great about India is that we just have so many streams of thought, and it is almost like uninhibited sort of thought. I mean, because if you really think about it, dharmic thought is essentially very plural. It embraces multiple truths. I mean, you can have 33 million deities being part of the same family. Jesus Christ can be incorporated on the facade of a Hindu temple, and the Buddha can be absorbed as an avatar of Vishnu.
Vishnu, yeah.
I mean, you can be Astek, Nastek, Shaivite, Vaishnavite. You could be vegetarian. You could be carnivore. You could be an idol worshipper, fire worshipper. You may worship nature. You could be into Shiva, Shakti, or a combination. I mean, this is what is so fascinating. You could say that, hey, listen, the path to truth is through yantra, tantra, mantra. Kaveri may say that the Shivling is a stone, and Ashwin may say that the stone is a Shivling, and both of us are equally welcome. So, in that sense, we can have 300 versions of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and we can, still say that your version and my version are absolutely sort of fine. All religions, in that sense, are paths to the divine, and I think that is what makes us. We've just got this huge bedrock of stories and thoughts and philosophy. And to my mind, there is a way that we can actually bring this to the forefront, because otherwise it's just there unexplored. Today's generation is not exploring that stuff. And so the way, what at least I try and do is I take some of these elements which are based on existing texts, existing work, existing ideas, and then I try and build a fictional story around it. And that's where I'm coming from. That in terms of a lot of these ideas and notions, uh, for us, the delicious question is always, what if?
Yeah.
And uh, the way I have at least seen it is that, for me, the favorite definition of a myth is Lewis, who said that a myth is a myth is a lie that couches a truth. I mean, so in that sense, it is, that it is fantastical, that it's unbelievable, but at the end of the day, there is a core truth that it is trying to reveal to you.
Right.
And surprisingly enough, I find that myth is in that sense far more true than history, because history ultimately is a version of events. And so even today we will have multiple versions on a given event. Something like, let's say, the Great Indian Rebellion of 1857, the Great Indian Revolt. In India we are taught about the Great Rebellion of 1857, whereas in England it's not taught at all because of whatever reasons. But if it is taught, then it is taught as the Sepoy Mutiny.
Sepoy Mutiny, yeah,
1857.
that's right.
So the point is, it's a version of events, and in that sense, it was George Santayana who said that history is a pack of lies about events that never happened and written by people who were never there. So, how much can we believe history?
Right.
So for me, the fact that the Mahabharat war is described in the epic is not fascinating. But if I can tell you that, well, there is something which tells me that this could have been a historical event, then that makes it fascinating.
Right.
Or, for example, if I could tell you that, hey, listen, the so-called Aryan Dravidian divide, or the Asura Deva divide, could be as a result of the drying up of the river Saraswati, for which satellite mapping now tells me that this river did exist.
Right.
And that makes it an interesting story.
Right.
So it is a combination of myth and history. Of course, as you know, most of my books go beyond simply myth and history, because they bring in philosophy and science and theology and sometimes anthropology and several other subjects.
And sometimes quantum physics.
and Keepers of the Kal Chakra was fundamentally quantum physics. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff which goes on in those books. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to talk about through that formula of myth plus history equal to mystery is that fact plus fiction is what makes life interesting, which makes those stories interesting, because it then throws open that delicious question, what if? What if something were true?
But Ashwin, and here is the point that so much of that is also now becoming so contentious.
Yeah.
For instance, Rosabelle line. You know that very well, that the fact that Jesus Christ was possibly born there became so contentious that they now try and sort of hide that fact altogether.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's so much of self-censorship, so much of perhaps creating facts where they possibly didn't exist. There's so much of that going on as well. What does one do in that case?
The answer is not to actually restrict the version of events, but actually to allow multiple versions to exist. That's the only answer that I see, because and I think I've written about this also in some of my columns, where I've talked about the fact that ultimately, which version will you choose to believe for anything, for any story? And to my mind, what we really need to come around to the view, because even if you look at the way history is taught in our country, I at least personally grew up thinking that there was quote unquote an Aryan invasion
Yeah.
at some point of time
Absolutely.
in India's history. I mean, that was part of my
Yeah.
curriculum. And then suddenly later on, I came to the view that no, it doesn't seem like an invasion. Maybe there might have been some sort of a migration, but
Right.
certainly not an invasion. Then there was a view that no, whatever migrations happened were probably of the ancestral North Indians, the ANI group, not the ASI group. And therefore, and that itself would have been probably 30, 40,000 years ago. So it does not fit in with the Aryan theory. Then, of course, I started believing then the out of India theory that, hey, listen, maybe because of the Saraswati drying up, maybe there was a movement westwards from India. Now, the question is that all of these, at the end of the day, we will have multiple papers and multiple viewpoints on all of this. Every paper will try and use science and various methodologies to in order to promote a certain point of view, and very often those points of view tend to be political. So the question is, which one of those will you accept? My personal view is that at least this is the standard that I have used every time, is that I will generally have a viewpoint, but I will first make sure that I read all the alternative viewpoints. And then I'll figure out for myself as to which of those I wish to settle down on. And that's pretty much where at least my personal view is, that even when we are teaching history to students in this country, let's give them the option of being able to understand that history is multidimensional. That it's not what you see is what you get. There are multiple versions.
And I was just wondering, Ashwin, when young people come to you, because a lot of young people read your books and they're amazed by the wealth of information and wisdom that's contained there. So when they come to you, do they express surprise about things that they didn't know, things that they were not taught about, and do they tell you? Does that surprise you?
Uh, well, the first thing that I clarify to them is that, listen, you're coming to the wrong person, because Ashwin Sanghi is not a historian. He's not a scholar. He's not a philosopher. He is not a theologian. He's, at the end of the day, simply a storyteller. So, I mean, and if you notice, every book in the Bharat series, I put that right up front as a disclaimer that, listen, read this entire book as a work of fiction. Even though I may have liberally used facts and history and philosophy and theology as part of the entire construct, but please do not treat any part of it as true. So that is very, very clear. But beyond that, I do get a lot of people coming up to me at festivals, at corporate events, even through email, Facebook, Twitter, saying, oh, I never thought about it this way.
Right.
You have given me a version which I have always deeply believed in, but there was no one who could actually give me a clarity about the issue.
Right.
And to which my answer to them is that, no, don't go by what Ashwin Sanghi is saying in his book, because ultimately, Ashwin Sanghi is a bloody good liar. So take that into account. But what I do with all of my Bharat series books is I provide a very, very exhaustive set of references at the back of the book, indicating which are the sources. And this again comes back to your previous question, Kaveri, which is about that narratives tend to be political. So even if you take, for example, a book like the Krishna Key, where I'm talking about the fact that there are lots of elements in the Taj Mahal which resemble those of a Hindu temple.
Yeah.
You'll find that at the back of the book, where there are references, there are several references which completely demolish my theory. So, in other words, the idea is that, listen, please look at both sides of the story, and then make up your own mind. In the case of the Mahabharat war, I have not only talked about the ideas which are related to the possibility that the Saraswati River dried up and there was a bunch of people who moved westwards, but I have also provided references for the contrary theory, which is somewhat similar to the Aryan migration theory.
Right.
So my personal view is that all of those who have doubts about whether the story or the version presented by history is right or wrong, there is no substitute for reading multiple versions, and preferably reading the versions that you don't like.
I love that you said that Ashwin Sanghi is a bloody good liar. Tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, you know this story because you've heard it from me. But when I had just written the Rosabal line, and I ended up having the very first press conference with my publishers, Westland, and there was a young journalist who got up and said that, listen, you're an MBA in finance and you have no degree in creative writing or literature or English or any of that, and suddenly one fine day you decide to sit down and you write a book which is based on which you call a theological thriller. What are your qualifications? What is your background to be able to write this sort of a book? And to which I replied, I said, listen, during the years when I was growing up, my mother used to always say that I was a bloody good liar. In other words, I could actually tell a story with an absolutely straight face and I could get away with the lie. And if you really think about it, what we as writers and what we as storytellers do is spin yarns. That's what we do. Now, the only difference is that with my Bharat series, what I do is I typically work on creating a sort of a skeleton structure, almost like a series of columns and beams, which are those columns and beams in that structure are made up of history, mythology, theology, anthropology, science, philosophy, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, there are many, many gaps in that structure. And that is where my brick and plaster fills in. And that's the fiction. So, I mean, for me, a story is basically, I start with a foundation and with columns and beams, which are existing material. And then I fill in the gaps with my fiction.
I was also interested to know that you're writing a web series, which I feel that, I mean, your books anyway are all tailor-made for, Netflix or Amazon. But it's interesting to me that you're writing a fresh web series or have written one. Talk a bit
Yeah,
about
so
it if you can.
what I'm realizing actually is that the entire context of storytelling. I mean, there is a bunch of people out there who believe that they are writers, and
Right.
so there is that purity of the process of simply writing books. And then there are others like me who believe that we are storytellers rather than writers. And if you are a storyteller, then frankly, whether you are writing a book or whether that book is adapted into a novella, or whether the novella is adapted into a comic, or whether the comic results in a video game, or the video game results in a movie, or a web series, or a television series, ultimately they are all multiple forms of telling a story. And now, I mean, I turned 50 a couple of years ago, and I believe that for the next 10, 15 odd years, I would like to be able to try my hand at being able to tell stories in different formats,
Yeah.
not just books. So I will continue to write my Bharat series books at the same pace. Typically, in 12 years, I've ended up with 6 books in the Bharat series.
That's right.
It's taken me about 2 years per book.
Yeah.
So I intend to maintain that pace as far as the Bharat series is concerned. But I would also like to be able to do storytelling in terms of other formats. Now, adapting books into movies and web series is one part of it. That, in any case, as a matter of due course, will happen with books in the Bharat series. But the thought I had was that why not try to develop stories where you have original ideas, where you feel that they are ideally suited first to screen rather than simply looking at them as books, because books and audiovisual are very, very different animals. So during this period of 6 months or so, I tried my hand at actually developing a crime thriller, where I've actually written up the entire structure, the entire outline, the entire season for the crime thriller, and so that is something which I hopefully eventually plan to collaborate with a screenwriter to
Right.
transfer that into a script. And then, of course, see where it goes with that.
Is it a
Uh,
period thriller or is it a contemporary thriller?
no, it's a very contemporary thriller, very much with the pace and the style of the thrillers I've written with James Patterson. And the intention is eventually to be able to make that into a series with a certain set of characters which are repeated from one season to the next. So that is something which I have done, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And the other part of it is that I believe that there are lots and lots of nuggets within our history and mythology
Right.
which do not lend themselves necessarily to an entire book, but they can lend themselves to episodic storytelling, and that's something which now I'm going to work on in terms of being able to bring some of those more interesting nuggets through episodes.
So, is this form of writing exciting to you? Is it new? How do you have to change the way you structure your work? Is it more collaborative?
To a certain extent, what you are doing as a storyteller doesn't really change much. The only thing that does happen is that when you're writing a book, you're never bothered about what it's going to imply in terms of production values. So
Right.
I mean, if I'm writing the Sialkot saga and I'm writing a book which is 70 years into the past, I never think about the fact that, oh my God, this is going to be so difficult to produce
Yeah.
because the costs are going to be,
Right.
just enormous.
Yeah.
Or if I'm writing Chanakya's chant, I don't think about, how the battle between the forces of Magad and the forces of Alexander the Great, how that great battle is going to be translated onto screen.
Right.
Those thoughts are not there and that's the great freedom that writing a novel gives you, because you never have to think about this stuff.
Yeah.
But when you are specifically writing with the intention of getting something produced, then I think you automatically become a little more cautious about how you are going to tell that story. Number one. I think the second part of it is that obviously, it was and this is something which I've focused on even when I'm writing my novels, that attention spans are limited.
Right.
And that applies not only with when you're reading a book, but it also applies to when you're watching a web series.
Right.
With any of these, you need to make sure that you hold the viewer or hold the reader, grasp his attention. And I've mentioned this many times, that when I'm writing a story, I think about sitting with a bunch of friends in a circle, and a few of them need to get up and take a bathroom break, and they don't get up because of the fact the story holds them.
Right.
So this is so important, how to hold the attention. And I think this is something which one tends to focus on a lot more when one is writing for the screen, because of the fact that that there is always the possibility that someone may turn around and simply change to another series at that given point of time.
Yeah.
If you can't hold their attention.
Exactly. Have you watched anything exciting during the past 6 months, which is really, where you really had to suppress your bathroom break?
Well, there have been a lot of, like, for example, I love Nordic noir. So, for example, all the thrillers which come from the so-called Scandinavian region, whether it was the earlier ones like The Killings or The Bridge, and then later on, of course, now I believe that it's a bit of a misnomer to call it Nordic, because now a lot of shows which are emerging from places like England,
Yeah.
shows like, for example, let's say Broadchurch, or
Yeah.
shows like,
Brilliant.
The Fall, and so many others are extremely tightly gripping shows, crime dramas, but they have all the sensibility of Nordic noir in that sense. So that's the sort of stuff that I love watching. Either something which is in the nature of crime, where till the very end I want to be guessing as to who did it. And I think the second genre that I love watching is historical stuff. So stuff. And there is so much stuff coming out, whether it's The Crown, or whether it is a mini series on Victoria, or whether it is stuff on the Vikings. And there's just there is just so much of material, and all of it is coming. Sometimes I really wish that we were students at a time when this medium was around. Rather than reading our boring history books, we could have actually been exposed, and we would have really realized that history is ultimately a story. I remember as a student being taken by school to watch the movie Gandhi, Richard Attenborough's film, which had just come out at that time. So I remember going and watching it, and I said, "Oh wow!" I'm for the first time, I'm being able to see the stuff that I've read about in my history textbook up on screen. But now you have so many options to be able to bring this stuff to light.
So, it's so fascinating, Ashwin. I was just wondering, as a storyteller, do you get distracted sometimes? Do you have you found your attention span shortening?
Frankly, it's very easy to get distracted because, particularly when you are a writer, most writers will tell you that they've gone through writer's block, where you sort of procrastinate, and you find that you've gone through a day without having actually achieved much in terms of productivity. But the honest to God truth is that, in my case, my writing process, particularly for the Bharat series, is so utterly structured that I rarely ever come up with a scene where, if I was planning to do 3 hours of writing, that I come out of those 3 hours not having written a page. That never happens to me. And that's partly because of the fact that I find that, once I've done a very, very detailed plot outline, once I've created a very detailed research bank, once I know every twist and turn of the story, then for me, the actual writing process is pretty much like a coloring book, where the outlines are already drawn and I'm just deciding whether I want to use a red crayon or a green crayon. So if that is the case, then honestly speaking, how can you get distracted? Because then your entire focus is, no, get this done. So in a lot of more artistic and more literary types will say that, listen, he's taken all the romance out of writing. Probably I have in some ways, but for me that structure works.
Ashwin, I wonder what kind of stories do you think are going to emerge from this phenomenon that we've been faced with? What are the stories that you think will come out in 2021, 2022? What are we going to be reading, watching? I wonder.
I think to a certain extent, what is it that writers do, Kavri? Ultimately, what we do is we either make familiar things sound new, or we make new things sound familiar. So all the stuff that has happened, that we are already familiar with, we are going to find ways to make that fresh. Or alternatively, we will have new ideas which we will try and make them sound rather normal to you.
Right.
Like for example, the way at least I see it is that we've lived in relative isolation for a large part of this year. So I would imagine that probably stories that deal with that sort of isolation, you may see more of those emerging, because now it is not so new. Now, what we thought the worst that could possibly happen has already happened.
Right.
We are not going to write about a pandemic in the nature of science fiction, because now the science fiction has already played out.
Exactly.
So I think to a certain extent, or otherwise, we will hark back to what we feel comfortable with. So, for example, we might want to actually not only talk about stories which are isolatory in nature, but also stories which allow us to recreate the times when we weren't so isolated, when when things were absolutely normal, when we were traveling the way we wanted, when we were partying the way we wanted. uh, so I think it's going to be a mixture of all of these. And then considering the fact that for the better part of last year, I would imagine the vast majority of writers and storytellers have had a lot of time on their hands.
Yeah.
I can certainly bet you that next year and the year after, there will be a far greater volume of stories coming out there, because a large amount of stuff has not got published during this year. So there's a huge pipeline
That's right.
that remains to be published or produced. A lot of scripts that uh, were lying ready to be shot never got shot. So I think you're going to suddenly see that I mean, you just go. The other day, I went into a cinema theater after 6 months, and there were all of two movies running in the multiplex that I went to.
Right.
There were six screens, but only two movies.
Mm.
I asked why are there only two movies, because they said that too many projects have got delayed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but now suddenly what's going to happen is all of these things, when they suddenly come up, you're going to have this bounce back is going to be immense, at least as far as the creative space is concerned.
It's very interesting. You think utopia will be the new dystopia?
It's very possible. It's
Yeah.
very possible, because I mean, you really think about this. I was the other day having this chat with my wife, and I said, listen, Anu, I mean, this entire 6 months or 8 months of what we've gone through has really made me re-evaluate in some ways what is important to me. Like, for example, there used to be a time when in any given month, I used to travel for at least 10 days, if not 15 days.
Right. With your
Uh,
lectures, with your
exactly.
lectures,
And
appearance at the
now, and
tournaments.
that, frankly, that gave me a sense of excitement. It gave me a sense of achievement.
Hmm.
I loved getting into an auditorium and being able to interact with 300 people,
Oh, with Dan Brown.
Absolutely, exactly. So many of those opportunities were there. But now suddenly one finds that one is doing all events online. The travel has come down to almost near zero. In the last 8 months, I've taken all of 2 or 3 travel trips. So the point is that, but now with that travel having gone, I'm suddenly realizing that I love the fact that I don't necessarily need to go for each and every event, and
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to be doing a face-to-face interaction with you like this.
Right.
I'm suddenly realizing when I'm opening up my wardrobe and I'm realizing that the actual clothes that I use
Yeah.
are probably about 5 or 6 sets of clothes.
Yeah.
The remaining stuff is just not used.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm suddenly realizing that my priorities in life are undergoing a change. Um, I can only hope that everyone who comes out of this in the next few months will come out of it not only with a sense of relief, but also with a sense of wisdom. That is something that I worry about the most.
I do. I agree
People will
with
just go back to their old ways.
Yes, I have a terrible suspicion that that might well happen. Tell me a little about your ideas bank, Ashwin. I find that so fascinating. What it has, 15,000 ideas. How much has it grown during the pandemic?
uh, when I last spoke to you, it was probably around 10 or 11,000 ideas,
Right.
and it's been in the works from roughly around the year when Gmail became commercially available, so roughly around 2005 2006.
Right.
And the way my idea bank works is basically I have one email ID which is dedicated to only receiving ideas, and the only one who emails into that particular email ID is Ashwin Sanghi. So whenever I have a conversation that may result in an interesting thought, or if I've seen a movie which had a very interesting premise, or for example, if I was in the car and I saw a particular hoarding that had a very interesting message. I'm reading a book and there is a particular line that strikes my fancy. I come across a interesting web link or a YouTube video or anything like that, I email it to myself on that particular email ID. And of course, the subject line always contains a few words in order to identify, almost like tags,
Yeah.
to identify what that is about.
Right.
And the idea is basically that, you know, all of us have great ideas, but the problem is we don't capture them when the idea occurs. And as a result of which, a few days later, the idea has already gone.
Yeah.
So, and this is something which I've realized, that whenever I'm sitting down to write a book or I'm working on the next project, I realize that's not the time when you should be ideating, because it's not as if you can just sit down one fine day and decide that you want to think about what you'll write next.
Right.
So, because of that, I find that it's far better if one can actually ideate throughout 365 days, keep ideating and keep capturing. And that's what I do with my idea bank. So, when I actually want to sit down and write a book, then at that point of time, I simply go back to my idea bank and then I search the idea bank, see which of those ideas seems to be the hottest one to work on.
Right.
And then I sort of toss those ideas around, then get into the research phase, to research the idea and to develop it far more, and then of course that leads to an outline.
Right. Ashwin, you're so generous with the process of writing. We're talking about how you do it, and you just said that you took the romance out of writing. Actually, no, you made it far more accessible to, writers who would like to know how does it work, and how does Ashwin Sanghi write the way he does. So, do you not sometimes feel, oh my God, I have to keep this to myself, or this is my particular patent, and this is the way I should work?
No, not really, because frankly speaking, I mean, it's not rocket science.
Hmm.
It's I mean, and nowadays all you need to go to do is go to master class, and you can hear Dan Brown and James Patterson and a bunch of Jeffrey Archer and a bunch of other people telling you as to what is their respective writing process and how it works for them. And there isn't one single formula that works, because there are so, like, for example, my dear friend Ravi Subramaniam says that when I'm writing a crime thriller, I don't have the end figured out before I start writing. So,
Right.
in other words, the end is something which is up for grabs.
Right.
Now, I could never work like that. I need to have every twist, turn, as well as the conclusion figured out before I actually start writing.
Right.
There are other writers who actually sort of, because they are not writing in the genre of a thriller, like for example, let's say romance writers, or writers of chick lit, etc. They can afford to let the story and the flow, or their emotions that day, pretty much decide as to where the story is going to go that particular day. That's not the case with me. So there are multiple writers who will have multiple perspectives to share, and my sharing that publicly does not in any way devalue me. It does not in any way take away from me, because just by I mean,
No,
if
I think
Dan Brown,
too
if
far.
Dan Brown throwing up a master class
Yeah.
could have been in some ways a sort of giving away trade secrets, as it were, then everyone would be a Dan Brown.
Wish. I wish. On that note, Ashwin, thank you so much for always illuminating us with your stories, and for making even the most ordinary things sound so compelling. I think that truly is a great art. I wanted to ask you one last question. Who for you stood out as the greatest or the best storyteller? It doesn't have to be a writer of this year. The one person who, in your sense, the person of the year. For you, who was the person of the year?
For me, honestly speaking, I must tell you and this is not a writer, but I would say probably a particular web series that I just found that the story was so utterly compelling was Scam 1992.
Oh, yes, I agree with you. My God,
You
what
know
a
that
fascinating.
I did not realize, Kaveri, that something like the Harshad Mehta story, there were so many intricacies in that story, which, frankly, I mean, I had, first of all, because it's such a long time ago, a lot of that material was already out of mind, and the way it was narrated. So in that sense, I would say that probably Hansal Mehta has done a phenomenal job in terms of crafting that series, obviously based on the material of Sucheta Dalal. And then beyond that, I would say that probably my good friend Samir has done a fantastic job of producing it, because I, I I just don't know where the time went. It was compulsive watching. I
I-
couldn't really, for those 2 or 3 days, I was just hooked to my iPad wanting to complete that series.
Even though you know exactly how it ends.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. See, we agree on so many things, Ashwin.
Absolutely. And when the greatest thing about us, Kaveri, is that we also choose to agree to disagree on occasion. And
Yes.
that's the way it should be.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ashwin Sangi, for sharing with us all your secrets so generously and so effortlessly yet again. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed the session. To catch your favorite authors live and check out the full schedule, you can log on to